Today I'd like to talk to all Cold Steel customers, but in particular to the Cold Steel Nation on Facebook. On that Cold Steel Nation site, I read a number of comments from people that think our knives are too big that Cold Steel makes. They're almost cartoonish, they say, or they're giants, or why would anyone carry such a big knife? What can you do with a big knife? What's the point? Why does Cold Steel do that? Well, there's a reason why I do everything. Every single knife I designed has multiple nuances and reasons behind it. And I make a lot of big knives because a big knife can do everything a little knife can do, but not vice versa. I can skin a mouse with this 7.5-inch Espada, or I could skin an elephant. The blade's big enough to do both. Skinning a mouse might not be as easy as with a 2-inch blade, but I could do it. Trying to skin an elephant with a 2-inch blade is impossible. It's just not up to the task. The meat will rot before you get the hide off. You need a big blade that has this huge sweep to peel that big, thick, heavy hide off in time to save the meat and distribute it. Let's go through the advantages of the big knife. One of the biggest advantages is leverage. When I open up this 6-inch Ti-Lite, this blade gives me a lot of leverage. It will aid in cutting power because it's longer than, say, a 3-inch blade. It'll aid in prying power, and it'll aid in grappling power. Ron and I were fighting Thursday, and we locked up blade to blade, and there was a moment where we're tussling, holding. Neither one of us wanted to let go of that position because we knew the other person would cut us. There's a momentary second and a half at the max that we were fighting for position grappling. You can't do that with a 2-inch blade. It's not suitable. You can't get any leverage. The 6-inch blade, the 5.5-inch blade, even the 4.5-inch blade will give you ever so much more leverage than a 2 or 3 or 3.5-inch blade. It seems today that so many people are uncomfortable carrying anything more than a 3.5-inch blade. I understand they're worried about being politically correct, but you're giving up huge advantages when you carry a small folder, especially a small tactical folder. When you have a longer blade, you have weight forward. When I have this 6-inch Raja 2, I've got a wide, thick blade, and the weight is forward. I'm going to have more cutting power, more chopping power. It's indescribable how much more you get with a longer blade. Yeah, once in a while, I can get lucky and cut a 1-inch rope with this Ti-Lite if I hit it just right, and I probably have to have a serrated edge. I can cut a 1-inch rope like it's butter every single time with very little effort with this knife. That longer blade is, with its weight forward balance, got more weight out in front that helps me a lot. This Espada, 5.5-inch Espada, has a wide, thick blade, 4 millimeters. This is a huge aid in cutting power. Because the blade is thicker and wider, it's stiffer, and it doesn't flex as much when you're cutting through stuff. And the wider blade increases its shearing power dramatically. The reason I made the Colossus was, in a 4-inch blade, how do you get more cutting power? The only way you can get more cutting power in a 4-inch blade is to make it wider. So I made a really wide blade and flat ground it to a real thin V cross section, had enormous shearing power. Problem is, very few people got it. So I'm trying today to explain to you the huge advantages of big knives. That wide blade will shear so much better than this blade. Now, this is a pretty good tactical folder for its size, but its long suit is using the point. This Luzon has a fairly wide blade and it's stiff, And that stiffer blade gives it more thrusting power as well. When the blade doesn't flex at all when you thrust, the penetration goes up exponentially. Years ago, there's a famous bulletproof vest company, I won't say their name, they got a contract to make bulletproof vests for the California prison system. And they had a disclaimer, because they made a gun to shoot knives to see what their vest could stop. They had a disclaimer that says, will not stop a cold steel tanto. The cold steel tanto with its wide, thick spine and the way we angle the point stuff would just flies through a vest, and they couldn't stop it. So that stiff blade is a huge advantage. The bigger grip is a huge advantage too. When I have this knife here, I can get a 4-finger grip on it, but barely. In the reverse grip, I can barely get a 4-finger grip on it. But when I go up to the 7.5 inch Espada, I can get 2 hands on it if I wanted. The 6-inch Ti-Lite, I got a full big grip, and I've got still space in the bottom for puño. This is the other thing that people don't get. When you have a little tiny folding knife like this, there's nothing sticking out of the bottom to hit with. You don't always necessarily want to use the edge of the point. Sometimes you want to use the butt of the knife to show mercy, or to match the force continuum that you're looking for. Like this Spartan. The handle's big enough that it takes even a big hand, locks it in, gives this beautiful butt to work with. It's got an integral guard and a 4.5 inch wide, stiff blade. Lots of cutting power, lots of slashing power, lots of thrusting power, and a super big, nice handle. Same thing here. You've got, on this Frenzy, a 5.5 inch blade with a real acute point. It's a very stiff blade, doesn't flex. It's got a long handle, gives you all kinds of grip options. I don't care what size your hand is, you can hold on to this. And that long handle lets you extend your reach. I can get clear back here in a push dagger grip and get almost 9 inches of reach with this knife, and reaches everything in a knife fight. Now you're saying, who's going to get in a knife fight? Well, hopefully none of us do. People ask me all the time, Lynn, what would you do if what steps would you take if you were in a knife fight? And I say, big ones. There's no one paying you to get in a knife fight. There's no upside to it, but it can happen. And it can happen in a moment's notice. If you're carrying a knife and you're attacked by somebody with a knife like one of my friends was, who successfully defended himself after he was cut 12 times, it happens. And it's not something that I wish on anybody, but it's very comforting, and especially for him in that case, to have had this Spartan. Because in 2 strokes, he ended that fight. 2 strokes with this knife, it was all over, finished and done. So a big knife is capable of making those cuts. A little knife, not so much. I'll tell you why. It has too short of an edge. This is my big problem with 2 inch, 3 inch, 3.5 inch. I start a big knife is over 4 inch blade, even a 4 inch blade. The problem is, when you go to use the knife, especially defensively, is the first 2 inches are so close to your hand, and you're so excited, the accuracy to get those 2 inches on isn't there. Look at this knife. When I put this in my hand, look at how accurate I have to be. I hope the camera can see that. I have to be perfect, but we're not perfect. What quite often happens is when you go to cut somebody with a 2 or 3 inch blade, your hand slams into them like this, or your knuckles do. Let's see, the camera can see that. I want to make sure the camera can see this. It slams in like this, and as it comes off here, it trails across. You might get the tip on, you might get an inch or so on the blade, but you don't get much blade contact quite often, and sometimes none. When you go up with blade length and you slam in, you start to get more edge contact. And also, I say usually the first 2 inches are to be discounted. You probably won't get those on your target. It's the 2 inches further on, or the first, as far back from the tip as you can to 2 inches from here. I'm saying it kind of clumsily, but this is where you're going to land. Those first 2 inches, so this is a 4.5 inch blade, I might get 2.5 inches on the target. When I go up to the 5 inch blade, or 5.5 inch blade, I've got 3.5 inches on. When I go up to the 6 inch blade, I've got 4 inches on target. 4 inches of cutting versus maybe none. oh yeah, this is politically correct. Absolutely. No one's going to go, oh. But really, if you can make yourself get comfortable carrying it, there's every advantage of carrying the big blade. And having the edge on contact is really, really important. Look at this. People say, why do you carry this big knife? Why do I carry this? It's 7.5 inches. I've got 5.5 inches here. I've got, if I get clear back here, I've got almost 14 inches of reach with this knife. More than a Bowie knife. That's why I made this knife. It's got reach and it's got lots of edge on contact so I can make those big cuts. There's another thing about the amount of edge you have when you're using the knife as a skinning knife. Not every knife isn't here a skinning knife, but you could definitely skin with this. You could skin with this. You can skin with this. You can skin with that. I could skin with this. That's no problem. So when you're doing little animals, I can use this big knife and I could skin her. I could clean up a rabbit with it, skin a rabbit and draw its entrails and make them very presentable to eat very quickly. I could skin a white-tailed deer. I could skin a moose with it. But not vice versa this. Try your little 2.5 inch blade, your little 2-inch blade, your little 3.5 inch blade, or that crappy scalpel knife that everyone's carrying. Try to skin big animals with that. See on that scalpel knife how many blades you break and how many times you cut yourself. Okay? A big knife with a big edge can do lots of things. Let's talk about rescue. Hey, if you're tangled up in a rope on the deck of a fishing boat and the seam net's going over the side, going to drag you to the bottom, would you want your friends to try to rescue with this, or would you want them to try to rescue with that? When it's an emergency and you have to make a life-saving cut, there's a time for a Swiss Army knife or a Leatherman tool or a little 2.5 inch folding knife that you think is really politically correct. You're not going to save anybody with that. I've saved lots of people with a 5.5 inch Voyager with a serrated edge. I've saved 2 horses and I saved 4 people in a car wreck outside of Tucumcari, New Mexico about 7 or 8 years ago. And I cut the van was upside down. There was people strewn all over the road. There was 4 people still upside down in the van. I cut their seat belts. They were under so much tension I couldn't unlock them. And I dragged them out of that thing on my back. 2 of them had compound fractures. And my wife and I were the only ones who delivered first aid for almost 20 minutes. So I know the rescue power of this knife. It's huge. This knife, it's a handy knife. You could do lots of chores with it, small utility chores. But it doesn't have anywhere near the cutting power and the usefulness as a bigger knife. The other thing is, a big knife has more reach. We touched on that earlier. Look at the reach I have on this. Look at the reach I have on this. Look at that. Look at the reach I have on this. If I pull this out and I come on guard, I'm going to make you come through this 6-inch blade and the 3.5 inches I have. That's 9.5 inches in. You've got a long ways to travel to get to me, to get past this. If I've got this little short blade like this and this 3-inch blade, it's pretty easy comparatively to go around my hand. When I'm doing this, I'm covering a big swath. You can't easily get around that. But the smaller blade, it's easier to come in and use either hand and occupy this. Knock this up, knock it down, move it to the side. It doesn't have that reach that precludes you from reaching in deep. Very hard to go past this. Much easier to go past this. That's another big advantage of the knife. And then the final advantage I want to talk to is the deterrent value. If you're ever so unfortunate as to have to use your knife for self-defense, quite often just opening the knife will be enough. If you open a little blade like this, even though it's pretty aggressive looking, it's still a little blade. But if you open this knife, like I do, and you show them that, that's pretty aggressive. It's pretty scary. You open this knife, you open this Luzon, and you go, that's a big scary knife. Who wants to face that? I'd find something else to do in another zip code before I went against this knife. Not fun. No one wants to go against a big knife. So, to recap, a big knife can do everything a little knife can do, but it's not vice versa. Vice versa is not true. A big knife, it's true, might not be politically correct today, but it might be the best choice for you.